The Parkers were the kind of family neighbors admired: polite smiles, trimmed hedges, and laughter spilling from their kitchen windows on Sunday mornings. Linda Parker often told herself she'd finally found peace. After years of struggling as a single mother, she had a husband who worked hard, a daughter who was growing into a young woman, and a home that finally felt safe. Or at least, that's what she wanted to believe. Mark Parker wasn't perfect, but to Linda, he was stability personified. A construction foreman with calm eyes and a steady voice. He brought order to her once chaotic life. He made sure the bills were paid, kissed her on the forehead before leaving for work, and always pulled Emily's chair out at dinner. "Every girl deserves to be treated like a lady," he'd say, smiling, and Linda, watching from across the table, felt lucky. Emily, 16, was quiet and observant. She adored her mother and tolerated her stepfather. Their house echoed with polite conversation, not warmth, not quite, but comfort. Linda sometimes wondered if Emily would ever truly accept Mark. She told herself time would fix it. Time fixes everything, she thought. It was a Friday evening when Mark came home early, a small bouquet of lilies in hand. "For my girls," he said, handing them to Linda before giving Emily a quick, almost fatherly kiss on the head. Emily stiffened. Linda didn't notice. She was too busy smiling, feeling grateful. The scent of lilies filled the room, soft and deceptive. Dinner that night was normal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a story about Mark's day at the site. He spoke animatedly, his hands moving in the air as Linda laughed at his jokes. Emily stayed quiet, picking at her food. "You need to eat more," Mark said, his tone light but insistent. "You're too skinny." Linda chuckled, but Emily's shoulders sank lower. After dinner, Linda cleaned the dishes while Mark and Emily watched a movie in the living room. When she returned, she found Emily sitting on the far end of the couch, eyes fixed on the screen, while Mark stretched his arm across the backrest. It looked harmless. Still, something in the scene pricked at Linda's chest. A fleeting unease she brushed away. "You're overthinking again," she told herself. Later that night, in bed, Mark reached for her. His hands were warm, his voice soft. "You seem distant tonight," he murmured. She smiled weakly. "Just tired." But as he drifted to sleep, Linda lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles, her mind looping through small moments: Emily's discomfort, that subtle tension at the dinner table. "You're just being paranoid," she whispered to herself, willing her thoughts to quiet. The next morning, sunlight painted the walls in pale gold. Emily was already gone for school. Mark sipped his coffee, reading the newspaper. "You spoil her," he said without looking up. "She's too soft. The world's not kind to soft girls." His tone was matter-of-fact, almost fatherly. Linda forced a smile. "She's still just a kid, Mark." He folded the paper, met her gaze, and smiled. Not for long. His words lingered long after he left. Linda went about her chores, humming to fill the silence. But something in her chest felt heavy, like a shadow she couldn't name. That evening, she found one of Mark's jackets draped over the back of Emily's chair. She laughed it off, shaking her head. "You're seeing ghosts," she muttered. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, whispering through the cracks. The lilies on the table had begun to wilt, their petals curling inward. Linda didn't notice. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and looked out at the quiet street, the picture of calm domestic life. Everything looked perfect, but behind closed doors, something was shifting, quietly, dangerously, and Linda Parker was the last to see it. The first sign came quietly, like a creak in the night that no one hears until it's too late. It started with Mark's new habit of checking on Emily. At first, it sounded harmless. He'd knock gently on her door after dinner, his deep voice carrying down the hallway. "Just making sure you finished your homework," he'd say. Linda would smile from the kitchen, grateful for how responsible he was. But over time, the knocks became later, softer, sometimes without words at all. Emily began locking her door. Linda noticed, though she pretended not to. "Teenage girls need privacy," she told herself one night as she folded laundry. But the thought wouldn't settle. Something about the way Emily flinched when Mark entered a room gnawed at her. One Saturday morning, Mark called from the living room. "Emily, come help me fix the garden fence." His tone was casual, but there was a weight beneath it. Linda watched from the kitchen window as they worked outside. Mark stood close, too close, his hands guiding hers around the hammer handle. Emily's expression was blank, her eyes distant. When she pulled away, Mark smiled and said something Linda couldn't hear. Emily laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It sounded rehearsed, brittle. That night, when Emily excused herself early for bed, Linda asked, "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated. "Yeah, just tired." Mark smiled, reaching for his glass of wine. "Teenagers," he chuckled. "Always tired." Linda forced a smile back, but her heart thudded uncomfortably. She wanted to ask more, to press, but something in Mark's calm gaze made her retreat. He had that way about him. Gentle voice, steady eyes, the kind that silenced questions before they were spoken. A few days later, Linda found Emily's favorite hoodie tossed on the laundry floor. On it, faint traces of cologne, Mark's brand. She froze, holding it to her nose. The scent was unmistakable. For a long moment, she stood there, unable to move. Then she shook her head, convincing herself of the simplest explanation. He probably borrowed it when he took the trash out. She whispered, trying to laugh. But it didn't sound convincing. Mark was changing too. He'd become more possessive, not just of Emily, but of the household itself. He decided when they ate, what shows they watched, how the curtains should be drawn at night. "A man needs order," he'd tell Linda, his voice edged with something she hadn't heard before, control. One evening, Emily came home late from study group. Mark was waiting by the door. "Where were you?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "With friends," she stammered. He stepped closer, towering over her. "You didn't call." Linda stepped in quickly. "Mark, she's fine. She's home now." He looked at her, his jaw tight, then softened his tone. "I just worry, that's all. You can't be too careful these days." Later that night, Linda found Emily crying quietly in her room. "Did something happen?" she asked gently. Emily shook her head, wiping her tears. "I just want to sleep." That was the first time Linda saw fear in her daughter's eyes. Real fear. But she didn't understand it yet. She told herself it was teenage mood swings, that every family had rough patches. Down the hall, Mark turned off the lights and locked the doors with his usual precision. He paused at Emily's room, his hand resting on the knob, for a moment too long before moving on. In bed, Linda reached for him, seeking comfort, but he turned away, muttering, "Long day." Outside, wind rustled through the trees, brushing against the windows like whispered warnings. Inside, the house lay still, a silence heavy enough to choke on. By morning, the world would look normal again. Coffee brewing, breakfast plates clinking, polite conversation. The illusion would continue, just as Mark intended. And Linda Parker, still clinging to the dream of a perfect family, would take one step closer to a truth that would destroy them all. By the time spring rolled in, the Parker household had grown eerily quiet. The laughter that once drifted through the rooms was gone, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled creak of footsteps that seemed to tiptoe around something unspeakable. Emily no longer lingered at the breakfast table. She barely spoke, barely smiled. Her eyes, once bright and restless, now carried a distant fog, as if she were living somewhere far away from her own body. Linda noticed, of course she did, but every time she tried to ask, Emily pulled away. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. Always just tired." Mark, on the other hand, appeared gentler than ever. He brought Emily her favorite snacks, offered to help with her school projects, and called her sweetheart, in a tone that made Linda's stomach tighten. One evening, when Linda came home early from work, she heard muffled voices upstairs. Emily's door was slightly ajar. Mark's voice, low, soothing, floated out. "You know you can trust me, right? I'm the only one who understands you." Emily didn't answer. Linda froze, hand gripping the railing. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Then Mark's voice shifted, firmer now. "Don't tell your mother about our talks. She worries too much." The door creaked. Linda stepped back quickly, pretending to adjust a picture frame as Mark appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling. "Hey, honey. You're home early." His tone was light, easy, as though nothing had happened. She wanted to ask what he'd been saying to her daughter, but fear, or maybe shame, glued her tongue to the roof of her mouth. That night, Emily didn't come down for dinner. Mark said she wasn't feeling well and offered to take her a plate himself. Linda hesitated before nodding. The sound of the tray clinking against the doorframe made her flinch. Minutes later, he returned, calm as ever. "She's asleep," he said. "Poor thing's been studying too hard." Linda tried to believe it. She tried to believe everything was still okay. But when she went into Emily's room the next morning to leave folded laundry, she noticed her daughter's bedsheets twisted and damp with sweat, her pillowcase streaked with mascara. Downstairs, Mark whistled softly while making coffee. At school, Emily's teachers began calling. "She's distracted," one said. "Withdrawn," said another. Linda promised to talk to her, but the conversations always ended the same way. Emily retreating behind a wall of silence, eyes darting to the floor whenever Mark's name was mentioned. One evening, Linda found Mark's work shirt mixed in with Emily's laundry. The faint scent of his cologne clung to the fabric. Her hands trembled as she held it, memories of that first bouquet of lilies flashing in her mind, the day everything had seemed so perfect. When she asked Emily about it, her daughter froze. He just left it there by mistake," she whispered, voice barely audible. Her hands shook as she folded the shirt back. Linda wanted to believe her, but deep down, something had cracked. That night, Linda stood outside Emily's door for a long time, listening. The silence inside felt too heavy, too forced. And for the first time, she was afraid of what might be happening in her own home, afraid of the man she had trusted most. The next morning, as she brushed her teeth, Linda's reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and uncertain. She opened the bathroom cabinet, reaching for toothpaste, when something caught her attention. A small box tucked behind the bottles of aspirin and lotion. It was a pregnancy test. Linda's hand trembled as she pulled the small box from behind the bathroom cabinet. It was half hidden beneath a roll of gauze, its edges worn as if it had been handled too many times. For a long moment, she just stared at it, the bold pink lettering spelling out pregnancy test, before her knees gave way and she sank to the cold tile floor. Her mind raced. Emily was 16. A child. There had to be another explanation. Maybe one of her friends had left it here. Maybe it was old. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, sticky, impossible. "Emily," she called, voice cracking. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. Emily appeared at the door, pale, startled, eyes wide like a cornered animal. When her gaze fell to the box in her mother's hands, her lips parted, but no words came. "Whose is this?" Linda's voice was low, shaking. Emily's throat worked, but nothing came out. Then she whispered, "I didn't mean for you to find it." Linda's heart stopped. "Are you?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She nodded once, small, fragile, guilty. Linda's breath hitched. "Who?" she demanded, her voice a sudden whisper, sharp and terrified. "Who did this to you?" Emily looked down, trembling. "Please, Mom, don't." "Who, Emily?" Silence. And then, in a voice so faint it barely reached her mother's ears, Emily said the name. "Mark." The world froze. The word hung between them like a curse. Linda blinked, as if her daughter's voice had come from someone else's mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, Emily, that's not possible." Emily sobbed harder now, clutching her arms. "He said it was love, Mom. He said he'd take care of me. He said you wouldn't understand." Linda's stomach lurched. Her hands went numb. She pressed her palm against the wall to steady herself, but the room tilted anyway. "He said it was love." The words looped in her mind, sharp and poisonous. "When?" she choked out. "How long has this been happening?" Emily covered her face, shaking. "Since before Christmas," she whispered. "He told me not to tell. He said it would ruin everything." Linda staggered backward, her body cold, her thoughts fragmented. Every moment, the late-night knocks, the garden, the way Emily flinched, snapped together like cruel puzzle pieces. She wanted to scream, to tear the walls down, to destroy every trace of him. Instead, she fell silent. The kind of silence that only exists after something inside has broken beyond repair. Downstairs, she heard the faint hum of Mark's voice, cheerful, unaware. "Dinner in 20, he called. Linda didn't move. Her reflection in the mirror looked foreign, pale skin, trembling lips, eyes wide with disbelief. Her heart beat, so loud she thought it might burst. Emily sank to the floor beside her, crying into her hands. Linda knelt down, pulled her daughter close, and whispered, "It's okay. It's over now." But the words felt hollow, lies made of air. She held her daughter tighter, her mind already shifting, hardening, because if the system couldn't protect Emily, she would, even if it meant destroying everything and everyone she loved. Dinner that night was a masquerade of silence. The clink of silverware, the faint hum of the refrigerator, nothing else. Mark sat across from Linda, humming softly as he sliced through his steak, unaware that the world around him had already begun to collapse. Emily didn't join them. She hadn't left her room since the confession. Linda's eyes followed his every move. Each breath he took felt like an insult, each casual smile a fresh wound. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles whitened. She wanted to scream, to lunge across the table, to make him hurt the way he had hurt them, but she didn't. Not yet. When he finally noticed her stillness, he frowned slightly. "You okay, honey?" Her voice came out low, steady, unnatural. "We need to talk." Mark's fork paused midair. "About what?" "About Emily." The name hung in the air like smoke. Mark leaned back, his expression carefully neutral. "What about her?" Linda stared at him. The man she'd once trusted. The man who'd fixed her sink, who'd kissed her goodnight, who'd stood beside her in wedding photos. Her throat burned as she whispered, "I know." He blinked, pretending not to understand. "Know what?" "Don't," she hissed. "Don't play dumb with me. She told me everything." Mark's face shifted, not to guilt or shame, but to irritation. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and sighed. "Linda, she's confused. Teenagers get ideas." "Stop." The word cracked through the room like thunder. "You did this to her. You hurt my daughter. Your stepdaughter." For a moment, Mark's mask slipped. His eyes went cold, calculating. "You don't understand," he said softly. "I love her. She needed someone. You were always too busy, too distant." Linda's stomach turned. "You love her? She's 16. He leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "Age doesn't change truth, Linda. She came to me. She wanted this." The words struck her like blows. She felt dizzy, sick. "You're a monster," she whispered. Mark's hand slammed against the table, rattling the dishes. "Watch your mouth. I've done everything for this family. I gave you stability, a home. And this is how you repay me." Tears burned in her eyes, but she didn't back down. "You destroyed us. You took everything good and twisted it into something vile." He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think anyone will believe you? Look at you, Linda, the hysterical wife, the drunk who can't keep a job for more than 6 months. I've built a reputation here. You're nothing without me." The words sliced deep. For years, she had depended on him, financially, emotionally. But now, hearing them out loud, something inside her shifted. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Get out." Mark rose too, towering over her. "You don't tell me what to do in my house." "Our house," she said, her voice trembling. "And it stopped being yours the moment you touched her." They stared at each other, predator and prey, though neither knew which was which anymore. Then, just as suddenly, Mark's anger melted into a strange calm. He smiled, that same gentle, practiced smile he'd worn since the day they met. "Let's not do this," he said quietly. "We can fix it. We're family, Linda. Families forgive." Linda felt something inside her go still. The trembling stopped. Her breathing slowed. "No," she said softly. "Some things can't be forgiven." Mark tilted his head, studying her. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. Linda turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll handle it." Later that night, long after Mark had gone to bed, Linda sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty wine glass in front of her. The clock ticked. The house groaned. Upstairs, Emily's sobs had gone quiet. Linda reached for her phone and opened her browser. Her fingers shook as she typed 3 words. How to buy gun. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the kitchen table where Linda sat, untouched coffee growing cold in front of her. She hadn't slept. Every tick of the clock since the confrontation had echoed inside her head like a countdown. Upstairs, Mark showered, whistling softly, as if nothing had happened. Emily's door remained locked. Linda stared at her reflection in the dark window pane, a hollow face she barely recognized. Her hands trembled as she whispered to herself, "There has to be justice." But even as she said it, she knew there wouldn't be. Mark was right about one thing. People would believe him. He was respected, steady, charming. She was the fragile wife, with too many pills and too much wine. When she finally gathered the courage to call the police, she stopped halfway through the number. What would she say? That her husband, a man adored by his co-workers and trusted by everyone, had gotten her daughter pregnant? That her child was too terrified to testify? It would become their word against his, and he would win. He always did. She put the phone down, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her eyes drifted to the hallway mirror, where a small family photo hung, the 3 of them smiling under last year's Christmas lights. A picture-perfect lie. By noon, Mark had left for work, kissing her cheek before walking out the door. The touch burned like acid. The moment the car engine faded down the street, Linda moved quickly, her body trembling with purpose. She walked to the cabinet above the fridge, pulling down the bottle of whiskey he kept for special occasions. She poured herself a glass and stared at the amber liquid. Special occasion, she muttered bitterly, before downing it in one gulp. Then she turned to her laptop. Her search history glared back. Gun stores near me. Self-defense weapons. Concealed carry permit. Her heart raced as she scrolled through results. One local shop didn't ask questions, cash only. The idea terrified her, yet somewhere beneath the fear was a strange calm. She was no longer crying, no longer pleading with God for a miracle. That part of her had died the moment Emily whispered Mark's name. That evening, she told Emily they were going out for groceries. Her daughter's face was pale, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. "Mom," Emily said weakly. "Please don't tell anyone," he said. Linda placed a hand on her cheek. "I won't tell anyone," she said softly. "I promise." They drove in silence, the hum of the tires on wet asphalt the only sound. But instead of heading toward the grocery store, Linda turned down an unfamiliar road, the one leading out of town. 2 hours later, a small brown paper bag sat on the passenger seat beside her, its weight impossibly heavy. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a silver revolver. When they got home, Linda hid it beneath a loose floorboard in her closet. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady now. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling as thunder rolled in the distance. Mark came to bed smelling of beer and smoke, his arm heavy across her waist. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The storm outside cracked open the sky, and in that flash of light, she saw it clearly. There would be no trial, no forgiveness, no second chances. In the darkness, she whispered the words that would seal all their fates. "You'll never hurt her again." Down the hall, Emily stirred in her sleep, unaware that her mother's decision had already been made, and that by the next sunrise, the house would never be the same again. The storm rolled in just after midnight, thunder cracking through the sky like a warning. Rain slapped against the windows, seeping through the cracks of the old Parker house. Inside, everything was still. The air hung heavy with unspoken truths, and in that silence, Linda Parker finally stopped pretending. She sat at the edge of her bed, the floorboard beside her slightly raised. Beneath it, hidden in shadow, was the revolver. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal as lightning flashed across the room, illuminating the outline of her face, pale, hollow, determined. She had spent the entire day trying to find another way, but there was none. Justice would not come through the courts, and forgiveness would never come through prayer. Down the hall, Mark was snoring softly, the sound of a man who slept without guilt. The sound made her sick. She looked at the clock, 12:46 a.m. Her heart beat steady, slow. Every tick felt louder than the rain. She rose and crossed the hall to Emily's room. The door creaked softly. Emily stirred, blinking through sleep. "Mom," she whispered. Linda sat beside her, brushing damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart," she murmured. "Everything's going to be okay." Emily frowned, half awake. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Linda whispered. "I just love you. That's all." For a moment, she stayed there, memorizing her daughter's face, the way her lips parted slightly as she breathed, the faint freckles across her nose. It was the face she had protected all her life, and the one she had failed to protect when it mattered most. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't falter now. Back in her bedroom, she lifted the revolver from its hiding place. It felt heavier than she expected, but solid real. She remembered reading once that revenge feels like justice until it's done. Maybe that was true. But this wasn't revenge. It was mercy. Mark lay on his back, one arm draped across the sheets, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of deep sleep. The lamp on his nightstand cast a weak glow over his face, the same face that had charmed her, deceived her, and destroyed her family. Linda stood over him, the barrel trembling in her hand. For a moment, she almost lost her nerve. Her body shook violently. "You don't have to do this," a voice whispered inside her head. But another voice, colder, truer, replied, "If not you, then who?" She raised the gun. Mark's eyes fluttered open. "Linda," he murmured, half asleep. "What are you?" The first shot rang out like thunder. The recoil jolted her arm, the flash searing her vision. Mark gasped, his body jerking upright, before collapsing back onto the bed, blood spreading across the white sheets. The storm outside swallowed the sound. Linda stood frozen, the gun shaking in her hands. The room smelled of smoke and iron. For a brief, dizzying second, she thought she might faint. Then, a faint sound behind her. "Mom." Emily stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. Linda's heart broke all over again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." Emily took a step forward, trembling. "What did you do?" Linda dropped to her knees, sobbing. "I had to, baby. He hurt you. He would have done it again." Emily shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We could have gone to the police. We could have." "No," Linda said, her voice almost calm now. "They wouldn't believe us. He made sure of that." Thunder rolled, shaking the windows. For a long moment, mother and daughter stared at each other through tears, one broken by pain, the other by love twisted into desperation. Then Emily whispered, "I can't live with this." Something inside Linda shattered. She stood, tears streaming down her face. "You won't have to," she said softly. Emily's eyes widened. "Mom, don't." But it was too late. A second gunshot tore through the storm. And then there was silence. When the rain finally eased hours later, the Parker house stood in eerie stillness, light still burning, curtains swaying from the wind through an open window. Two bodies lay still beneath the hum of the dying storm, their faces turned toward each other, frozen in the moment where love and horror became one. Outside, the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon, pale and colorless, as if the world itself couldn't bear to look. The sun rose weakly over Maplewood that morning, pale and uncertain, its light spilling through the thin curtains of the Parker house. Inside, the silence was suffocating, the kind that doesn't just fill a room but seeps into the walls, the furniture, the air itself. Officer Ray Carter was the first to arrive. The call had come from a neighbor who heard what she thought were firecrackers during the night, but ignored it until morning, when she noticed the front door still ajar. Now, standing in the doorway, Ray felt a cold prickle of dread crawl up his neck. "Dispatch, this is Carter," he muttered into his radio. "We've got a possible double." The living room looked undisturbed, but something about it felt wrong. Too still, too clean. A coffee cup sat on the counter, lipstick smeared across the rim, the coffee inside long gone cold. He followed the faint smell of gunpowder down the hallway, where the carpet grew darker with each step. The bedroom door was half open. He pushed it slowly, revealing the scene. Two bodies lay side by side, Linda and Emily. Mark's body was sprawled on the opposite end of the bed, the gun resting loosely in Linda's hand. Blood had dried in uneven trails across the sheets. The walls were splattered faintly, like dark raindrops that had long since stopped falling. Ray froze. He'd seen plenty in his years, domestic fights gone bad, murder-suicides, ugly endings, but something about this one made his stomach knot. Maybe it was the way Linda's hand still reached toward her daughter, as if she'd tried to hold her one last time. He stepped back, swallowing hard. "Jesus," he whispered. Detective Mary Ann Holt arrived minutes later, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a quiet presence. She took one look at the room and exhaled slowly. "What a mess," she murmured. Ray nodded. "Neighbor says they kept to themselves mostly. Looked like a nice family." Mary Ann crouched near the bodies, her gaze steady. "The nice ones usually are," she said softly. Her eyes lingered on Emily's face, the innocence frozen there, and then shifted to Mark's. "You see his wedding ring?" she asked. Ray shook his head. "No. Maybe it was taken off." Mary Ann stood, arms folded. Or maybe he didn't deserve to wear it. She moved to the dresser, where a photo frame stood. The three of them smiling on a beach somewhere, sunlight glinting off the waves behind them. It was the kind of picture families put on Christmas cards. Perfect, happy, safe. Lies, all of it. "Get forensics," she said finally. "And call CPS. I want to know everything about this family, neighbors, school records, medical history, everything." As officers began marking evidence, the house came alive with movement, cameras flashing, murmured voices echoing down the hall. Outside, curious neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, whispering theories. Mary Ann stood at the window, staring out at the pale morning sky. There was something about this scene that didn't sit right. It wasn't just a murder-suicide. It felt purposeful. She turned to Ray. "You feel that?" He frowned. "Feel what?" She looked back toward the bed, her voice low. This wasn't madness. It was a message. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, scattering a handful of leaves across the driveway, one landing on the welcome mat that still read "Home Sweet Home." And as the coroner's van pulled in, Mary Ann's eyes caught something. A torn envelope beneath the dresser, marked in smudged ink, "To whoever finds us." Detective Mary Ann Holt sat at her cluttered desk, the Parker file spread open before her. Crime scene photos, autopsy reports, school records, all arranged like pieces of a shattered puzzle. The air in the precinct was heavy with the hum of printers and murmured voices, but her focus didn't waver. She'd seen countless domestic tragedies, but something about this case gnawed at her. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Every move, every shot, every silence. The letter found beneath the dresser lay sealed in an evidence bag beside her coffee. Its edges were smudged with blood. She'd read it 3 times already, each word sinking deeper than the last. "To whoever finds us, I failed my daughter. He took everything from her, from us. No one believed. So I did what no mother should have to. Forgive me. Please, don't let her name die in shame. Linda Parker." Mary Ann exhaled slowly. The letter wasn't a confession. It was a cry for justice too late to matter. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the underlined phrase in the final paragraph. He took everything. She looked up as Officer Ray Carter entered with 2 folders. "You're going to want to see this," he said. He handed her Mark's employment file. "Turns out our golden husband had some skeletons. 2 harassment complaints at his old job, both dismissed quietly. HR said he was well-connected." Mary Ann's jaw tightened. "And the daughter? Anything from the school?" Ray nodded grimly. "Emily's counselor filed a report 6 months ago. Behavioral changes, anxiety, declining grades. She even mentioned possible abuse. But when child services followed up, Linda denied everything. Said Emily was just going through teenage mood swings." Mary Ann rubbed her temples. Classic pattern. Fear, denial, control. Ray hesitated. "You think Linda knew?" "I think she found out too late," Mary Ann replied. And by then, she'd already been broken in ways no one saw. She stood and walked to the evidence board, pinning up the family photo, that smiling facade from the beach. Around it, she added copies of police reports, witness notes, and time stamps. "This wasn't just a breakdown," she murmured. "It was the collapse of an illusion." Ray frowned. "So what's our move now?" Case seems closed, murder-suicide. Clean motive, clear confession. Marianne turned, eyes sharp. Closed on paper. But I want to know why every system failed this girl before the gun did. Later that evening, she visited Maplewood High, where Emily's locker still stood untouched. Inside were old notes, a broken necklace, and a torn photo. Half of it missing, the other showing Mark's arm around her shoulder. Marianne's heart sank. The missing half wasn't random. It was ripped carefully, almost as if Emily had tried to erase him from her life. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and persistent, like the echoes of that night. Marianne stood beneath the gray sky, gripping the photograph. She tried to ask for help, she whispered, and nobody listened. Back at her car, she scribbled a note in her file. Find out who silenced the complaints. Someone protected Mark. Someone still breathing. She looked back once at the darkened school building, its windows reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. Something told her the story wasn't over, not yet. 6 months later, the name Parker had become a headline, a symbol of everything broken in the system that was supposed to protect families. The mother who killed for justice. Stepfather's dark secret exposed. The story had spread far beyond Maplewood, twisting through talk shows, blogs, and court debates. But behind all the noise, Detective Marianne Holt sat in the back of a courtroom, watching what remained of the truth play out under fluorescent lights. Linda Parker was dead. Emily Parker was dead. Mark Parker's sins, however, were very much alive. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Prosecutor Dana Whitfield stood before the jury. The evidence is clear, she said, her tone sharp. Mark Parker systematically groomed and abused his 17-year-old stepdaughter. For years, he manipulated those around him, including his wife, creating an illusion of perfection that masked the horror inside their home. She held up a photograph, the same one Marianne had pinned on her evidence board months ago. This, Dana said, voice trembling slightly, is what evil looks like when it hides behind a smile. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, the defendant is deceased. This is not a criminal trial, but an inquest into the systemic failures surrounding the case. The judge nodded. Proceed, counselor. Let the record reflect that our purpose here is truth. Marianne's gaze flicked toward the witness stand, where Dr. Evelyn Cross, the school counselor, sat with trembling hands. I reported Emily's behavior changes, she said softly. But Child Services said there wasn't enough evidence. They closed the file after a single home visit. Linda looked tired but insisted everything was fine. I should have pushed harder. Her voice cracked. I failed her. Marianne felt a lump rise in her throat. She'd heard that phrase too many times in this case. We failed her. Next came testimony from the HR director of Mark's former company, a gray-haired man with rehearsed calm. The complaints were inconclusive, he said. Inconclusive. Dana snapped. Or inconvenient. He hesitated. Mark was well respected. We didn't want to ruin a man's career over rumors. Murmurs rippled through the room. Marianne clenched her jaw. That's how monsters survive, she thought, wrapped in respectability. When the coroner was called, the room fell silent. Both deaths were instantaneous, he said. Linda shot Mark in the chest, then turned the weapon on her daughter before taking her own life. The angles suggest hesitation before the second and third shots, emotional distress, not calculation. Dana's voice softened. So in the end, she broke, not because she wanted to kill, but because she couldn't bear what had already been done. The coroner nodded. That's my conclusion. A few jurors wiped away tears. As the day wore on, Marianne's mind drifted to the letter, Linda's final plea. It was now projected on a screen for the courtroom to see. Each word shimmered under the harsh lights. Please, don't let her name die in shame. The judge leaned forward, his voice heavy. This tragedy raises a deeper question. How many Emilis are out there unseen, unheard, silenced by those they trust most? Silence fell over the room. Even the reporters stopped typing. By the time the hearing adjourned, the verdict wasn't legal, it was moral. The system had failed. Mark's crimes were undeniable, and Linda's actions, while unforgivable, were no longer incomprehensible. Outside, Cameras flashed as Mary Ann exited the courthouse. A reporter shouted, "Detective Holt, do you think Linda Parker was a murderer or a mother pushed too far?" Mary Ann paused on the courthouse steps. The wind tugged at her coat. She looked straight into the cameras and said quietly, "She was both. And that's the tragedy." The crowd fell silent. As she walked away, the evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. In her hand, Mary Ann carried the final piece of evidence, a small envelope she'd found in Linda's jewelry box just days earlier, unopened and addressed in trembling handwriting. "To my daughter, if I don't make it." She hadn't read it yet, but she would. The letter had been sitting on Detective Mary Ann Holt's desk for 3 days before she finally opened it. The paper was yellowed at the edges, sealed with trembling handwriting. "To my daughter, if I don't make it." Inside, there were 2 folded pages, one addressed to Emily, and the other to anyone who might one day read their story. Mary Ann unfolded the first page carefully, her hands trembling as though the letter itself carried the weight of ghosts. "My darling Emily," it began, written in Linda's soft, looping hand. "If you are reading this, it means I couldn't protect you the way I promised. I wanted you to grow up knowing love was safe. I was wrong." Mary Ann's eyes traced every line. The words bled with pain, guilt, and love twisted into desperation. Linda described how Mark had changed after the wedding, how charm turned to control, how kindness became manipulation. "He made me feel small," Linda wrote. "He made you afraid. I saw it too late. Every time I looked at you, I saw my own silence staring back." There was no mention of murder, no hint of premeditation, only sorrow and resolve. "If I'm gone, know that I did it because I couldn't bear for him to touch you again. I don't expect forgiveness, only understanding. Tell the world I loved you enough to break myself." Mary Ann wiped her eyes, then turned to the second page, shorter, colder, addressed not to Emily but to the ones who will judge me. "You will call me a monster. You will say I had a choice. But I lived in a house where choices didn't exist, where silence was survival, and truth was punishment. You will ask why I didn't leave. I will ask you why no one knocked." Mary Ann folded the pages back into their envelope and sat there for a long moment, the hum of the precinct around her fading into a blur. She'd seen countless letters from inmates, victims, and killers, confessions, denials, pleas, but never one that felt this human, this tragically clear. A knock came at her office door. It was Officer Ray Carter, holding a stack of mail. "You might want to see this," he said, handing her another envelope. It was from the Women's Correctional Facility in Coldwater, dated months before the murders. Linda's name was on the return address. Mary Ann's heart froze. She slid it open. Inside were copies of letters Linda had written to a prison outreach counselor, letters that had never been mailed. In them, Linda detailed her suspicions about Mark's behavior toward Emily. "He looks at her in ways a father shouldn't." One line read, "When I question him, he says I'm paranoid. I've started sleeping with the door locked." There were 5 letters in total, all stamped returned, incomplete address. They had sat somewhere in the postal system, lost in bureaucracy, unseen until now. Mary Ann's chest tightened. Linda had tried to reach out. She had asked for help. The letters were her voice from the grave, evidence not of madness, but of neglect. Mary Ann looked out the window, the city lights flickering against the dark. "She was trapped," she whispered, "and we all missed the signs." She gathered the letters into a single file, sealing them inside an evidence envelope marked for the record. Somewhere deep inside her, she knew this wasn't the end. There was still one truth buried in all the paperwork, one missing piece Mark had taken to his grave. The Parker house stood empty now, its windows boarded, its walls stripped bare. The once bright garden had wilted into overgrown weeds, and the wind carried through it like a whisper, faint, mournful, and unending. To the neighbors, it was just another abandoned home, but to Detective Mary Ann Holt, it was the echo of everything the system failed to hear. She stood at the front gate that morning, months after the inquest had closed, watching the sun rise over the cracked porch steps. In her hand was the final report, closed case, all evidence filed, no further action required. The words felt hollow. Justice had been documented, but never delivered. Inside, Dust coated the floors like frost. She walked through the silent rooms, the kitchen where Linda once made breakfast, the hallway where Emily's laughter once echoed. The faint outline of family photos still marked the walls, pale rectangles of what had been. In the bedroom, she stopped. The bed was gone, but the shadows remained, faint stains on the floorboards, barely visible now. Mary Ann crouched, tracing the wood grain with her fingertips. "You tried to tell us," she whispered into the emptiness. "And we didn't listen." Her voice trembled. The case had consumed her life, but it had also changed her. Every report, every testimony, every letter from Linda had carved a permanent scar across her sense of duty. It wasn't just about solving crimes anymore. It was about hearing the unheard before tragedy struck. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope, one she had found weeks earlier, hidden in the lining of Linda's jewelry box. It was addressed simply, "To whomever still cares." She opened it slowly. "If you're reading this, please remember us not for how we died, but for how long we survived. We were more than the night that took us. We laughed, we loved, we dreamed. And even when I was afraid, I never stopped being her mother. Don't let the silence win again." Mary Ann closed her eyes, tears welling. She folded the letter carefully, slipping it back into its envelope. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A new message flashed across the screen. Subject: Missing child report. Similar pattern, Coldwater County. Her stomach tightened. Coldwater, the same facility where Linda's lost letters had originated. She stared at the message for a long moment, then looked back at the house, one last time. The sun had risen higher now, light spilling across the broken porch, illuminating the dust that hung in the air like ghosts refusing to leave. Mary Ann took a deep breath. "Not again," she whispered. She walked toward her car, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. The door creaked as she opened it, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet morning. She placed the envelope on the passenger seat beside her case file, started the engine, and drove away, the Parker house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just a shadow against the trees. But even as the road curved and the town faded behind her, Linda's words followed. "Don't let the silence win again." And Mary Ann knew this story wasn't just an ending. It was a warning. The echoes of the past never truly fade. They wait for someone to finally listen. End.